Charlotte, we wrote a paper.
We did. How cool is that?
I know. So, what we're getting at here, I think, is trying to sort out connections between current debates and policy around abundance, affordability, sort of technical aid around climate change, and the deeper sociological literature around public trust and government.
For me, this conversation became really fruitful when I took a step back from thinking about just the sociology and trying to think about what is the actual conversation around policy right now that you're hearing. A lot of it is very technical, right? A lot of it is about pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. How do we address climate change from a technical standpoint, which is, of course, very important. We need good policy that does that. But we also need to involve social science in that conversation and how to make it happen.
Yeah, there's this sense, I think, that the core of, say, the Inflation Reduction Act or other sorts of climate policies has been about how do you get a heat pump attached to a house, or how do you retire a coal-fired power plant with solar panels. And more recently, there's been this vogue of saying, well, the real problem here is government. The government has too many regulations, or it's somehow unaffordable to try this. What our paper argues is this is really sort of shadowboxing at the wrong set of targets, that what's really driving this is to think about climate change as a government capacity problem. It's really hard. You've one person in the county after 40 years of austerity and tax cuts who has to manage the housing program, the transportation program, and social services, because that's where people largely experience their government. Unless you have climate policies that affirmatively attend to local government capacity, affirmatively create ways for democratic response between people and their governments, you wind up in a place where you sort of are making a technological argument about a trust gap that's rooted in a capacity failure.
Right. And that trust gap is, I think, very important for people to understand. If they're not coming from a social science perspective, they may not realize that since the 1970s, the American people have lost a lot of trust in their government and in their fellow Americans. The responses that people give on survey questions have showed pretty consistent declines in people's agreement with statements about other people are going to generally do the right thing, or you can trust people. Now we hear more people saying, well, you can't be too careful with strangers, right? And then we also have a precipitous decline in people's trust in the federal government, as well as some smaller declines in their trust in local government, the media, academia, and scientists. And we need people to cooperate with one another and with the government in order to accomplish any of these things, whether it's putting a heat pump on a house or some kind of behavior change.
Yeah, and simultaneously, we've seen, and totally non-coincidentally, like $1 trillion cut from local governments just in California, courtesy tax reforms. And that sort of devastation of local government has gone through cycle after cycle of austerity. And so you wind up in this odd place where the first time we have big fiscal policy and climate change and the Inflation Reduction Act, we're sort of tacking on little bits of community benefits agreements and grants to big spending, say, on a EV battery factory or something. But the problem is that the core of the issue isn't the technology. It's the failure of government to actually be able to align the economy and provide distributive social benefits to people. That's not a nice to have. That's core. For instance, in the paper, we talk a lot about a California program to clean up the air in disadvantaged communities and how regularly that is run aground on the fact that the local community governments functionally cannot execute these plans. They neither have the revenue nor the staffing to do it. And so you wind up with really good policy ideas that founder because people haven't thought deeply about trust and how trust emerges from co-democratic creation, especially in times of technological shift or social crisis. And given that the climate crisis is all of those things, it really strongly suggests that local government trust and capacity is at the core of it.
And that if we don't address the issue of local government capacity and we try and implement these programs, it will further erode trust, likely, because people are going to say, wait a minute, you promised all these kinds of things and now you can't deliver. See, government doesn't work. But government can work if it is properly funded and with policy that is well designed to accomplish achievable goals.
Right now, we're seeing the federal government scrambled. We're seeing big party realignments around what government could or should deliver. And I think the hope is that folks in this field and in these spaces begin engaging with that as a problem of human communities rather than as a problem of technocratic policy.
And the good news is that we have data from other countries showing how making local governments more effective does actually start to rebuild public trust in government. And not only public trust in local government, but in federal government as well. So, from my perspective, we can create a lot of momentum toward finding solutions at the local level through democratic participation. And we can, trust people themselves to know their communities best and to find ways to live healthier, safer lives in those communities. And when we do involve people in local policy in those ways, backed by the federal resources that we put towards things like the Inflation Reduction Act, we can rebuild trust and surface the best solutions to then expand out from one community to the whole nation.